Good evening, it's Thursday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Do-yeon, filling in for Kim Bo-kyung. If you're a fan of Korean dramas, your microwave may have been kept busy popping popcorn recently from the variety of shows to choose from on streaming services. The most popular among them right now are Netflix, Mask걸, and Disney+ Moving. The two are resonating well on the charts for non-English shows on their respective platforms. While they're from different competing streaming services and can't have them both at the same time like your onion and caramel popcorn, the two do have something in common. They are both adaptations of popular webtoons, which means the plots have been around for fans for quite some time. Meanwhile, things are different at the theaters. Korean films at the box office aren't doing that well, despite Korean content showing its competitiveness. So to discuss content on both streaming services and at the theaters, we have two experts joining us today in the studio. First, to my right, we have Professor Jason Beckerweiss of Kyungdong University, who's also a film critic. Welcome.
Well, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
And to my left, we also have Professor Jae Seo from Seoul Institute of the Arts, who's also a filmmaker. Welcome.
Nice to be back.
Now, Professor, I wanted to start with you. Let's start with Mask걸 on Netflix, which topped the non-English chart for TV shows. Let's get straight to it. What's so appealing about the show?
Well, I really like this particular series. It's one of my favorite of the year. It follows this female character. We see her as she kind of develops this online personality, and we see it from her perspective, and it deals with lots of issues facing women in Korean society. But I think one of the reasons I like the show so much is because it reminded me of the energy that Korean films had back in the late 1990s, early 2000s, kind of approaching these issues using genre, experimenting with different kind of genre tropes. And you see that in this show, and it's just so well produced, so well made. It's wonderfully acted as well. Brilliant use of mise-en-scène, colors. The production design is just incredible. There's Yoo Sung-hee, who's worked with Park Chang-wook on films such as Old Boy, The Handmaiden, Decision to Leave. I mean, you can see that in the show. It almost feels like you're watching 7 movies. And so it was a very kind of binge-worthy drama. I couldn't stop watching it. I really enjoyed it. You know, some really strong female characters. And it also deals with some interesting themes in terms of revenge as well, which we've seen in Korean cinema time and time again. I mean, the famous examples including, of course, Park Chan-wook's Vengeance trilogy, Old Boy, Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, Lady Vengeance. We've seen countless other films, I Saw the Devil, and even earlier films such as The Housemaid. So it feels very Korean, quintessentially Korean in many ways. But yeah, just a superbly produced show.
Right. Now, Professor, so I wanted to talk about the other competing streaming content, Moving. What's so appealing about this show?
Well, it's one of the biggest budgets, for example, for Disney+, and it's studded. But basically, it's a show about, sort of in the vein of a lot of Hollywood stuff, about people with superpowers, so supernatural powers that they have. And we have a star-studded cast: Yoo Sung-young, Han Hyo-ju, basically Yoo Sung-bum, also Cho In-sung. Basically, I think most of the money was spent on the cast. But it's basically starts out very kind of in a humble way with a high school student has superpowers that he can't control, and his mother. And it turns out, he has this because his mother is also kind of a super being as well. And this story is kind of this 20-part series with a big star-studded cast, and also includes, all the themes about basically generational gaps, school sort of violence, and also just the hierarchy in Korean society, and also about North and South Korea, because some of the superpowers from the North side is also fighting with the South part. So that, and also just, it's also about power, who has power in Korean society. So it's a kind of a sprawling kind of thing, but we haven't seen something where, usually this is more towards Marvel or DC, but this is Korea's attempt at trying to start this kind of franchise in a way. I think if this is that successful in its first season, I think we'll be seeing more of this. But I kind of like it because it takes a Korean stance on how, if you have superpowers, how you would use it. You know, for example, one of the main characters is a high school boy, and the mother has taught the boy basically to hide his power, and sort of in the vein of Superman, you know, basically be humble and all this. But of course, there are other characters with powers that are strength, flying, regeneration, all that stuff that are not as humble in this. So it's just a Korean K-drama with a superhero twist is the way I would see it, but really kind of a critical look at Korean society. So I think it's kind of Disney Plus's big hit.
Right, right. So building on from that, both of them are online streaming platforms. Multiple platforms have had popular content before, but it's rare that both Netflix and Disney Plus, the leading streaming services, have Korean content topping the chart at the same time. How do you view this situation? Is this an opportunity, maybe a new opportunity for Korean content to take a step further?
Well, I think it's really shown how far Korean content has come, but in the big game, like big picture of the whole thing, more than Disney Plus, I think Netflix has really cleaned up with Squid Game, and they've had a lot of hits on their platform. And I think it's kind of funny that both Disney Plus and Netflix hit, you know, sort of the number 1, 2 type of thing at the same time. Although, you know, although there's a lot of talk about these shows being sort of the top billing, you know, these basically streaming services don't really reveal the actual numbers. So, for example, in film, you have box office numbers, so ticket sales per person is actually like kind of an open information thing. But as you know, streaming services, that's their proprietary information, so they kind of hide that. But of course, you find it out by their own PR machine that'll kind of hype some show saying that, hey, you know, for example, Squid Game is their biggest show ever, you know, things like that. But I think going back to moving, I think, you know, Disney Plus has not had a huge hit. I think the big bet is probably the one before that. And Netflix had Squid Game and all these other shows. So I think Disney Plus said, you know, let's put all our chips into one show, like really do it. And I think it was kind of a risk in a way, because is it better to kind of spread out your content, or is it better just to put all your money into one? And I think they tried this on that one, and luckily they succeeded. But I think, as I mentioned at the beginning, it just shows you the quality of Korean content is something that is watched all over the world. And especially with Hollywood right now having the writer's strike and the actor's strike going on, we're not going to see new content for the next 2 years, because all content, you know, produced is stuff that's made just before the strike, which is coming out like now and next year. But 2 years from now, there'll be nothing. So I think right now it's an opportunity for Korean content to have a more foothold. They already have started stuff with all the K-drama stuff that they've done. And then, you know, we had also the Oscar-winning Parasite movie that put Korean cinema on the map. So I think this is a good opportunity for them to kind of, I think, make it a regular thing for many years to come.
Well, that's a good point with the Hollywood writer's strike. Now, Professor, I wanted to shed light on where these films come from. They're both spin-offs of popular webtoons with plots that have already been received well by the Korean webtoon fans. And you've already spoken about the Koreanness of the show, Maskgirl, and Professor Seo also mentioned about the Koreanness of moving incorporated with the superheroes. So what do you think it is about both stories that help them resonate with the international audience when they come from a very Korean background?
Yeah, no, moving's really interesting because, you know, science fiction has had a real uphill battle trying to get the content to connect with audiences here. You know, obviously the Marvel films have done really well, but science fiction as a whole has been very, very hit and miss. And there's just a whole long list of Korean films and shows that clearly directors want to make that have just not worked in Korea. I mean, Alienoid is probably one of the more recent examples. But moving, it's interesting how it's really connected. Having watched, I haven't finished it yet, but one of the striking features of the show, I mean, it's also written by the man who wrote the original webtoon, Kang Paul. And I think he cares a lot about characters and characterization. And I think if you differentiate like Korean content from American content, I think one of the kind of striking characteristics or features of Korean content is characterization and how they are character-led. Sure, you have the spectacle and you've got the backdrop, but there's a big focus on characters and developing them. And I think if you watch a show like Squid Game, it spends like the first couple of episodes just focusing on the characters, which I think really helps the show as it moves forward because you really connect with them. Now, moving in a similar way does the same thing. We get to understand these characters, who they are. You know, one of them owns this chicken restaurant, one of them owns this like donkatsu restaurant, and they just feel very, very Korean. And I think audiences here really, really connect with those characters. And I think that's just crucial. And sure, you have the spectacle, you've got them flying around, you've got them doing, you know, acrobatics and all the rest of it. But ultimately, if people don't care about the characters, they don't care about the show. And I think moving, I think it works because of the characters. I mean, Yoo Seung-young, I think his character is really, he's just really endearing for much of the series, at least of the show that I've seen so far. And Han Yo-ju as well, who plays the owner of the katsu restaurant. They just feel very, very Korean, and I think they connect. And I think overseas as well, they're kind of different compared to, you know, your usual Marvel fare. And so I think that's one of the reasons why it's striking a chord overseas as well as domestically. So yeah, big emphasis on characters, and I think that's why this show, and also Maskell as well. I mean, Maskell focuses on one female character, and I think that really carries the whole show. And I think, yeah, that's one of the reasons why it worked for me.
That's right. I mean, Moving has episodes strictly for each character's introduction. So,
Exactly.
right,
So it's structured in that way, right? So you got the Yoo Seung-bom character, and I love the fact that he speaks this kind of English as well. And quite often, Korean actors, when they focus so heavily on delivering those English lines, and sometimes it can come across as like somewhat awkward. But with Yoo Seung-bom, he speaks English pretty well, and I think it just comes across so natural, and he really kind of embodies the character so effectively. And so yeah, it's really well cast actually in an unusual way. I mean, Han Yo-ju, certainly the way she's introduced initially, it does come across as a little bit weird because she plays a much older character. She plays this mother figure. We learn more about her as it kind of goes back in time. But the casting is actually really interesting in the show. So it's kind of unconventional in that way, and that's another reason why it works.
Okay. Well, now, Professor So, you also already mentioned the writer's strike in Hollywood being an opportunity for Korean films to step up. But besides from this indirect effect, what's something that Korean content industry can do themselves to take a step further to make them more competitive at this
Well, one of the things about why Korean content is popular is that storytelling, and also, as you know, Jason pointed out, just the cultural nuances of, you know, I think, you know, mukbang is actually now an international word. You know, a lot of people take Korean words as something that, you know, is popular all over the world. So what K-content does is actually puts all these cultural things like, you know, all the K-pop stuff or the K-drama stuff and puts it in a really interesting kind of story format that's different from Hollywood. And sometimes the ending is very unexpected in a lot of these series. And also, you know, when you see a Hollywood movie, you kind of know what the 3-act structure is going to be. And usually there's a happy end and the good guy wins and all this. But in a Korean drama, you really don't know. It's more, I think, akin to maybe Game of Thrones, where you don't really know which direction things are going to go. And then the characterizations are sort of different. So I think people are really grappling onto that. And I guess, like, we're a Confucius society where family is the main thing. And even if you look at, you know, a successful movie like Parasite, it's about a family.
Yeah.
And a lot of these shows are about this kind of family structure, which is kind of disintegrating inside the story because of, you know, we have problems with like low, you know, birth rates, high cost of living, competitive society. And these are issues that all these storytelling sort of envelops. And I think what people find appealing about it is that it's happening all over the world, you know, especially with the COVID crisis that we had. You know, society was very kind of insular, and they started just watching this Korean content, which I think really hit home to a lot of people during that time. I think, you know, representation of like Squid Game, for example, it's about people that have and have not, and it's just a kind of a universal story. So for us to continue doing this, I think I always say this when I'm on the show is we can't just rest on our laurels right now. This is really great. All the filmmakers that are making stuff now, it's good, but we need to kind of sort of train the next generation of new talent, like another Park Chan-wook or another Bong Joon-ho. And right now, the problem is that a lot of these streaming platforms are just giving content to people that are successful. In order for this to continue in the future, you have to kind of give independent films another chance, like a younger filmmaker that doesn't have all the necessary curricula vitae for their careers ready. But if you give them the chance to direct these things, and a lot of these series are directed by one person or two directors, things like that. I think it's not like that in the West. You actually give it out to about 7 or 8 directors. So I think we need to kind of diversify sort of the talent behind the camera a little bit. And also the actors as well. We're used to seeing the same faces over and over again, but I think instead of just giving them the opportunity, we really need to see new faces. And I think some of these shows, the side characters, sort of like the other characters, we have the main stars. Everybody goes to see them because of that. But the good acting that we see from people that are not less known is, I think, the great opportunity for Korean content to diversify.
That's right. We're talking about exciting stuff, but there is a grimmer news for the box office. Korean films have not been doing so well greatly. So how do you view this situation with domestic films?
Yeah, no, it's pretty depressing. 2 films have broken even this year. The Roundup, number 3, and also Milsu or Smugglers. And even Concrete Utopia, it's done okay, but it still hasn't quite broken even yet. It will, and but yeah, it's a little bit of it's trying to decipher what's going on. I mean, during the pandemic, it was clear that it was impacting cinema, the number of admissions being sold, or tickets being sold rather. And now we're out of the pandemic. We've seen recovery in America. They had Barbenheimer over the summer, one of the busiest summers of all time. And yet the film industry here seems to be struggling. And there's a lot of it. I mean, if you look at the consensus, there seems to be a consensus that it's partly due to streaming platforms, and also it's due to the fact that ticket prices have increased quite significantly, kind of ahead of inflation. And so going to cinema is just seen a lot more expensive now. And I mean, Korea used to be, certainly going to cinema used to be very inexpensive, and it used to be, couples will go frequently, and yes, couples still go on dates, but it just doesn't seem to be the kind of cultural occasion, or at least the frequency of it doesn't seem to happen as often as it used to. And so films now are they're opening kind of softer, and they're playing for longer. There's a film out this week, for example, called Sleep, and it stars Jung Eun-mi and Lee Sung-kyun, and the film's break-even point, I think, is around about 800,000 admissions. And I think they hoped that the film will play quite long, so for several weeks, for it to finally, sell enough tickets for it to kind of make a bit of money. And I think that just really kind of underscores the precarious kind of situation the industry faces at the moment. Because on the one hand, yes, Korean cinema, Korean content is often in the news. We're here talking about it on this show, and we're lucky enough to be here to be able to report on what is a very exciting and vibrant industry. But films in cinemas are struggling, and it seems like the summer for me was a confirmation that something has changed. And I'm not sure we're going to see the number of films selling 10 million tickets. We're not going to see that as often as we used to. We'll see it occasionally, but it seems that with streaming platforms having really kind of transformed the ecosystem, and also the fact that it's just a lot more expensive, that seems to have had a great impact on cinema going.
So you're kind of putting the blame more on the system rather than the actual quality of the content.
Oh yeah, no, the quality of films, no, absolutely not. If anything, the films I've seen in cinemas this summer has actually been pretty good. I like Smugglers a lot. I liked Concrete Utopia. And in fact, if you look at the films that did well over the summer, it's actually quite encouraging, because these are films that are not based on IP. Well, yeah, I mean, certainly not to the extent that, you've got franchises or sequels, and I mean, Concrete Utopia is going to become a series. It has already got a sequel's already been made, and there's a series that's being produced. But I think these films are not your kind of conventional Korean blockbusters. They're different. I mean, Smugglers is this female-led movie. It's very colourful. It kind of evokes this kind of 1970s style. I mean, it's set in 1970s, and Concrete Utopia is really bleak. And so I think if you're looking at the films that are doing well, actually they're good films, they're original films, and that's what really got me into Korean cinema in the first place, rather than these films that are very much reliant on conventions. So I guess it is bleak, but there is some kind of sense of optimism or hope, that can be generated out of this somewhat bleak situation.
So building on from this, Professor, what do you have any tips for the box office industry, like domestic films industry, to break through, kind of fight the system that's obviously an uphill battle, because the quality, like Professor Beck,
if I knew the answer, I'd be a millionaire, I think, help the industry. But I think I agree with Jason. The ecosystem of Korean cinema and just entertainment in general has really changed because of the pandemic. It's all over the world like that. But I'm more optimistic because I think it's a temporary situation. We got used to having people watch streaming services at home during the pandemic, and then ironically, when the theaters had a chance to open up again, they should have not raised the ticket prices so high. It was bad timing on their part. So those two things kind of collided, and I think it really changed the way people's behavior for watching entertainment has happened. But I think what I find optimistic about Korea is that we're a very small country, luckily, because there's not much to do. I think after a while, the young people will still go to the malls, go shopping, eat at restaurants, and it's still the cheapest form of entertainment so far. Even though they raised the prices, I think that pattern is going to come back. But as Jason mentioned, the 10 million ticket sales at the box office. It used to be all Korean cinema made their primary profits off of movie theaters. That's going to change. I think that way of basic profitability is something from the past. So we have to kind of figure out a system where we do this. But at the same time, what's interesting to me is that this conversation hasn't happened just because of the pandemic. It's been a war between television and cinema, for a long time, since 1950s. Yeah. And, so far cinema had that edge because big screen, good sound, surround sound, all this. But as you know, all the LED technologies had advanced to the point where you could actually have surround sound at your house.
Easily.
And your screen is so big, it kind of looks like a movie theater if you turn off the lights. Right. So I think those things have changed, but I think what the behavioral pattern for what people do in terms of when they watch a series versus a film on a streaming service is different. When it's a film, the family kind of gathers around still.
Sure.
Yeah, and then they're eating something, but let's not all disparately go somewhere. Whereas if it's a series, there are a lot of bathroom breaks, people are looking at their phones. So there's still a respect for cinema, which is a one-time event. So if that's happening at the house,
with bigger commitment, right?
Yes, it's going to be naturally, a thing where it's going to be a trend. I think, suddenly the youth will be like, hey, let's go to the theaters again. Right. I think, although we didn't do that well in the summer, it did better. And one of the reasons I think is last time we talked about was air conditioning. It was so hot this summer that people flocked to the cinemas because it was better air conditioning than at home. So we have to kind of figure out a new model to get people back in the cinemas. But I think the way to do it is basically kind of change the attitude of the distributors and try to get them back into cinemas, but not raising prices and making it difficult for people to go back. But I think, again, I trust cinema. I think movies are something where, it's not about you watching something by yourself, but with a whole bunch of people. So after when you come out, you can kind of hear a whisper, hear the whispers of other people either liking the film or disliking it, or afterwards, when you go eat your meal, you have something to talk about.
Right. I'm so sorry, professors. I could talk about this hours, but that's all the time we got for today. Thank you so much for your insights. I hope to speak to you guys again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.